everything you know about the Renaissance, all those amazing paintings, sculptures, and buildings was basically bought by one family. And they did it using money tricks that were technically illegal. The Medici family didn't just participate in the Renaissance, they purchased it. And the crazy part? The banking system they invented over 600 years ago is still running your life today. Every time you use a credit card, transfer money between accounts, or take out a loan, you're using systems that started with this one family from Florence, Italy. But here's what nobody tells you. The Medicis weren't born rich. They weren't royalty. They came from basically nothing. And in a time when lending money for profit was considered a sin that could send you straight to hell, they figured out how to become the richest family in all of Europe. So how did a family of wool traders become more powerful than kings? How did they turn a small money-changing business into an empire that controlled popes, funded wars, and literally shaped Western civilization? Let me take you back to medieval Florence because this story is absolutely wild. Picture Europe in the 1300s. It's a mess. The disappearing just vanished about half the population. Wars are everywhere. The economy is falling apart. But Florence, this city in what we now call Italy, is starting to recover faster than everyone else. Why? Because Florence had something special. It had bankers. Now, banking back then wasn't like banking today. There were no fancy buildings with marble floors. Bankers literally sat on benches in the street. The Italian word for bench is banca. That's where we get the word bank. And when a banker went broke, they would smash his bench. Bancarotta. Broken bench. That's where we get the word bankrupt. But here's the huge problem that every banker in medieval Europe faced. The Catholic Church said that charging interest on loans was a mortal sin called usury. You could literally go to hell for it. The Church controlled everything back then. If the Pope said something was a sin, that was it. You didn't argue. So imagine trying to run a banking business when you're not allowed to make money from lending money. That's like trying to run a restaurant where you can't charge for food. It makes no sense. But the Medicis, they found a way around it. This is where Giovanni di Bici de' Medici comes in. He's the guy who really started it all. Giovanni wasn't the first Medici to deal with money, but he was the first one to turn it into something huge. And he did it by being incredibly clever about one thing: foreign exchange. See, the church said you couldn't charge interest, but they didn't say anything about charging for exchanging one currency for another. And in medieval Europe, every city had its own currency. Florence had the florin. Venice had the ducat. England had the pound. France had the livre. If you were a merchant trying to do business across Europe, you needed someone to exchange your money. And that someone was going to charge you for the service. Giovanni realized that if you structured a loan as a currency exchange, you could hide the interest inside the exchange rate. Let me explain how this worked, because it's actually genius. Say a merchant in Florence needs money to buy wool from England. Instead of giving him a loan with interest, Giovanni would sell him a bill of exchange. The merchant gets florins now, and agrees to pay back in English pounds later, when the wool is sold. The exchange rate that Giovanni set for this transaction? It just happened to include a nice profit for the bank. But technically, no interest was charged. It was just a currency exchange. The church couldn't say anything. Giovanni wasn't charging interest. He was just providing a service to help merchants do business internationally. If he happened to make money on the exchange rate, well, that was just smart business. This might sound like a small thing, but it changed everything. For the first time, bankers could operate without fear of being called sinners. They could lend money, make profits, and still go to heaven. At least, that was the idea. But Giovanni didn't stop there. He also improved something called double entry bookkeeping. Now, I know that sounds boring, but stick with me because this is actually one of the most important inventions in human history. Before double entry bookkeeping, keeping track of money was a mess. You'd write down that someone owed you money, but you might forget to write down what you gave them. Numbers wouldn't match up. It was easy to make mistakes and even easier to steal. Double entry bookkeeping meant that every transaction got recorded twice, once as a debit and once as a credit. If you gave out money, you recorded it as money leaving your account, and you recorded it as money owed to you by someone else. At the end of the day, Both sides had to balance. If they didn't, you knew something was wrong. This might seem obvious now, but back then, it was revolutionary. For the first time, you could actually trust the numbers. You could see exactly where money was coming from and where it was going. You could spot fraud. You could make better decisions. Giovanni used this system across all his operations, and it gave him an edge over every other banker in Florence. He knew exactly how much money he had, who owed him what, and how profitable each deal was. His competitors were basically guessing. Giovanni also did something else that was incredibly smart. He made the Medici Bank the official bank of the Pope. See, the Vatican collected money from churches all across Europe, donations, taxes, payments for various church services. All of that money needed to get to Rome somehow, and transporting physical gold and silver across war-torn Europe was dangerous and expensive. The Medici Bank offered a solution. Churches could deposit money at local Medici branches, and the Vatican could withdraw it in Rome. No actual money had to travel, just paperwork. For this service, the Medicis charged a fee, and because they were handling the Pope's money, they got protection and legitimacy that no other bank had. Who was going to mess with the Pope's bankers? When Giovanni died in 1429, he left behind a banking empire that operated in major cities across Europe: Florence, Rome, Venice, Milan, Geneva, Bruges, London. Each branch was set up as a separate partnership, which meant if one branch failed, it wouldn't bring down the whole network. This was another innovation. Before this, if your business failed in one place, you lost everything everywhere. The Medicis invented what we would now call limited liability. Each branch could fail on its own without destroying the parent company. Modern corporations still use this exact same structure today. But Giovanni's real legacy wasn't just the money. It was what he told his sons before he disappeared. He basically said, stay out of the spotlight, don't draw attention. Help people when they ask, but never act like you're better than anyone else. Keep the people on your side. His son Cosimo took this advice and ran with it. Cosimo de' Medici took over the bank and became one of the most powerful people in European history. But you would never know it by looking at him. He dressed simply. He lived in a nice but not outrageous house. He walked through the streets of Florence like a regular citizen. And he gave away enormous amounts of money. Not because he was generous, although he might have been, but because he understood something important. In Florence, showing off your wealth was dangerous. The city was technically a republic. Regular citizens elected their leaders. If you acted like you were above everyone else, they would turn on you. So Cosimo played the game perfectly. He never held official political office, but he controlled everything behind the scenes. He funded buildings, churches, and art. He paid for public works that made life better for regular Florentines. And in return, the people loved him. They called him the father of his country. Now here's where the Renaissance really kicks in. Cosimo didn't just spend money on buildings, he spent it on people. He sponsored artists, scholars, philosophers, and scientists. He funded the translation of ancient Greek texts that had been lost to Europe for centuries. He basically rebuilt the library of ancient knowledge. Why did this matter? Because Europe had been living in the dark for hundreds of years. When the Roman Empire fell, most of the knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome was lost. Libraries were burned. Scholars fled. For centuries, Europeans forgot what their ancestors had known. The Medicis helped bring it back. They hired scholars to find, translate, and copy ancient manuscripts. They built libraries to store them. They created schools to teach them. And they paid artists to bring the ideas to life through paintings and sculptures. This wasn't charity. This was a calculated move. By funding art and culture, the Medicis built their reputation. They made themselves look like the good guys, the patrons of civilization, the people who cared about beauty and knowledge. It was the best PR campaign in history, and it worked. When Cosimo died in 1464, his grandson Lorenzo took over. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, took the family's patronage to another level entirely. This guy didn't just fund artists, he discovered them. A young sculptor named Michelangelo, Lorenzo found him when he was just a teenager, brought him into the Medici household, and raised him like a son. Michelangelo ate dinner with the family. He studied in their private gardens filled with ancient sculptures. He learned from the greatest minds of the age, all because Lorenzo spotted his talent and decided to invest in him. Sandro Botticelli, the guy who painted The Birth of Venus. Lorenzo was his biggest supporter. Leonardo da Vinci got his start in Florence during Lorenzo's time. The list goes on and on. Almost every major artist of the Renaissance had some connection to the Medici family. But let's be real about something. The Medicis weren't angels. They were businessmen, and they were also politicians. They crushed their enemies. They manipulated elections. They bribed officials. They did whatever it took to stay on top. And the banking practices that made them rich, they also had a dark side. The bill of exchange system that Giovanni invented, it was basically a way to hide interest. Modern economists would call it predatory lending with extra steps. The Medicis took advantage of the system they created. They charged huge fees. They manipulated exchange rates. They made money from both sides of every transaction. When borrowers couldn't pay, the Medicis took their property. They used their financial power to control governments. They lent money to kings and popes. And when those kings and popes couldn't pay back, the Medicis extracted political favors instead. They got tax exemptions. They got exclusive trading rights. They got their family members appointed to powerful positions. 2 members of the Medici family became pope. 2 others became Queen of France. Not bad for a family that started out changing money on a street bench. But here's the thing that really blows my mind. The financial instruments that the Medicis invented, the same tools they used to dominate 15th century Europe, are still in use today. Bills of exchange evolved into checks and bank transfers. Double entry bookkeeping is still the foundation of accounting. Branch banking is how every major bank operates. Letters of credit are still used in international trade. The whole concept of hiding interest inside complex financial products, Wall Street does that every single day. The Medicis basically invented modern finance, and they used it to buy an entire era of human history. Think about that for a second. The Renaissance, one of the greatest periods of artistic and intellectual achievement in human history, was largely funded by one family's banking profits. Michelangelo's David, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Botticelli's masterpieces, the rediscovery of ancient philosophy, the birth of modern science, all of it was made possible because one family figured out how to make money from money without making the church angry. Is that inspiring? Maybe. The Medici showed that wealth, when directed toward creativity and knowledge, can transform civilization. They proved that private money can fund public good. They gave us some of the greatest art ever created. But it's also a little disturbing. It means that the course of human culture was shaped by whoever had the most money. The ideas that got funded were the ones that pleased the people writing the checks. The artists who succeeded were the ones who had rich patrons. And the system that created all that wealth was built on loopholes and hidden fees. Sound familiar? Today, we like to think that art and culture are pure expressions of human creativity. But the Medici story reminds us that money has always been involved. The question is whether the people with money use it to lift up humanity or just to enrich themselves. The Medicis did both. They built personal empires while also funding genuine masterpieces. They were greedy and generous at the same time. And maybe that's the most human thing about them. They weren't heroes or villains. They were just people who understood power and knew how to use it. Their legacy is everywhere. In the banks that hold your money. In the accounting systems that run every business. In the museums filled with Renaissance art. In the very idea that private wealth can shape public culture. 600 years later, we're still living in the world the Medicis built. Whether that's good or bad, I'll let you decide. If you want to learn how other families shaped history, watch this next video.